Miters are a great way to put boxes like this together. What I really like about it is that because we've got a mitered corner, there's no end grain showing on any side. One of the downsides to miters is because it's an end grain to end grain glue up, there's not a lot of strength there. Also, it's pretty neat to dress up these miters, make them look a little bit cooler. I'll show you what I mean. Look at this box. We've still got our miters, same material, working with maple here. But what I've done differently on this one is I've cut splines into it, and the splines are made of a contrasting material. They're made out of walnut. So we get a couple cool benefits here. One is the spline is going crossways across that miter, so it reinforces the joint. The other thing that is neat is it looks cool. On this side I've cut with a dovetail bit, so it gives the appearance as though we have dovetailed that corner when we put this all together. Splines are a great way to reinforce corners, and they look nice. So let's talk about splining here on the router table. Big deal here, you've got to have a carriage to hold the material to cut for the splines. There's no way that we could do this freehand. So what we want out of this is a device that's going to go on your router table, securely hold the material in place, because if it walks as it goes through, that's going to adversely affect your splines. It's going to make it hard to get parts to fit together well. So it's really got to be nice and solid. I'm going to do my cuts with a dovetail cutter. I've also got on the table just an 1/8 inch spiral bit. Lots of options for spline cutting. The 1/8 inch spiral bit is what I used for the second splines on the first box I showed you. We can go with 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch. We can use whatever bit we want for that. I do like the spiral cutters. I think they provide a better surface finish inside the cut. So then when we slip the spline inside there, we get a better fit between the spline and the slot that we've cut. As I said, in this case, I'm going to use a 1/2 inch dovetail bit. More specifically, it's a 1/2 inch 14 degree. And I'm going to disassemble just a little bit here to help you see what I'm talking about. One of the things that we want to check for is the height of the cutter. So as that bit comes up, we want to make sure that it's going to cut into the miter, but it's not going to cut so deeply that it comes through the inside corner of our box. So a really easy way to make that happen is simply put the box into the sled and then set the height of that bit, watching the top of the cutter relative to the inside corner of the box. And that gets me in a good position right there. Now these side supports are very cool because we need a couple things to happen here. One is we want repeatability. So once we create or generate a position for one of the splines, we want to make sure that we cut that uniformly. What I mean is that I can use this to set the distance from the cutter, router's unplugged so we can get in close like this, from the cutter to what will be the edge of the box, because the box is going to go up against this face. Lock that in place. Now the way that's going to work is box comes in, make the cut, box comes in, make the cut. So it creates uniform spacing from the cutter to the edge, and that's going to give us our best repeatability, our best look. On the other side of the world here, we put this one in. That's going to provide support for the box over here. Remember I talked about the jig being solid so that things don't walk as we're going over the cutter. We also want to make sure that the box can't move while it's going over the cutter because that'll adversely affect your cut. All right, that locks me in. So what we've done is set the height of the bit, position these guides so that it controls the position of the box, and with a little electricity here, we'll be ready to make a cut. If we're doing an 1/8 inch bit, a 1/4 inch bit, the approach is going to be exactly the same. Make sure the top of the bit isn't going to penetrate inside the box. This results in the spline profile inside the box. Next thing we want to look at is, especially in the case of these dovetail splines, how do we make the component that's going to fit in here so it's a good fit, looks good in the box. I'll show you that next. The dovetail splines are actually easier to make than you might think. Let's look at the dovetail bit set up first. Router's unplugged. Here's what's going on here. You got to use the same cutter that we cut the female with. So that cutter is still on the table. Now we're going to use the fence on the router table. And notice that down here, the bottom edge of this carbide cutter is just slightly below the surface of the table. That's our starting point. Face of the fence is forward so that we're going to make just a minimal cut. Think about what we've got going here. The inside dimension of that dovetail slot that we cut for the spline is a 1/2 inch because we used a 1/2 inch dovetail cutter. So the material from which you cut your spline should be just a little bit over a 1/2 inch thick. 9/16 or so would be fine. Then what we're going to do is stand our material on edge, pass it over the cutter, rotate it, pass it over the cutter, and that results in this dovetail shape being produced in our material. Now, the more the fence is forward, the more the fence is toward me, the bigger that tail will be, the tighter the fit. The more I move the fence back, the more material I remove, the looser the fit. So the way we work this is do a test cut, grab your material, your box, and then slip that in and see what you've got. When we have a good fit, then we can go to the next step, which is actually to get the spline material ready. Remember that as you adjust the fence, you're always making 2 passes. So tiny movements in the fence have a pretty big result in your spline material because it's twice the effect. So real small changes in that fence. Once we've got that to fit, then we can take this to the table saw and rip this so that we get just the spline material, which is then going to look like that. That can then get glued in. Once the glue is dry, use a handsaw and cut it flush and sand it, and you'll end up with splines that look like this. So, key to this, good solid splining jig on your router table. Make sure that everything is nice and rigid so that the box isn't walking while you make the cut. Fine tune your fit between the spline material and the slot that we've cut. When you glue it together, you can then come back, sand them nice and flush. Not only are you going to get a great looking box when you're done, but you're also going to do a lot toward reinforcing that miter to really increasing its strength.